what's interesting to me about Sunday more than anything else is that whenever Sondheim was asked, "What was your favorite show?" he always didn't want to give an answer. He avoided it. He said, "My least favorite show is Do I Hear a Waltz?" And that had more to do with the trouble with it. But, Sunday must have been his favorite show to some degree because notice that Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat are the two books that he wrote as a collection of his lyrics. He could have done other titles, of course, but the fact that both of them came from Sunday indicates that that's the one that he had the most affinity with. And one can understand why, because this is about the story of an artist. Now, granted, there were different types of artists here. Surratt was a painter, and certainly Sondheim was a songwriter, but the difficulties in creating certainly apply to both, or any artist for that matter. No matter what you're doing, there are certain difficulties you have to do, and yes, indeed, bit by bit, you do put it together. It also has one of the great American themes, which is love versus career. And here we have Surratt, who does love Dot in his own way. It's not that he loves her less, it's that he loves his art more. And what's really wonderful is at one point he talks about women in general and says they have never understood. And then he says, and no reason why they should. He understands that not everybody has an artistic sensibility, and that indeed he does. And this is to his detriment as a human being, as a person who can relate to other human beings, but art comes first.
Tell me about the song Sunday. Why is that so beloved?
Well, for one thing, the visual nature of it certainly makes it beloved because here we are. We've seen these disparate people here, there, and everywhere on that stage. And suddenly there's that painting. We should have seen it coming, but a lot of people don't. I'll confess I didn't. That it would actually culminate there. And it's one of those things when you say, of course, not well, is not so much isn't that wonderful, which you do say too, but of course, yes, it had to be that, but you didn't necessarily see it coming. And it's so wonderful to have that stirring melody, even with the lyrics, which detail the colors that are in the painting in quick little syllables, because after all, that's what Sunday in the Park, the painting is. It really is a situation of little pointed dots. And so you have these little dots. And there are those who say that the character of Dot was not arbitrarily named, that she was named for that reason too. That's been a point of controversy over the years, but nevertheless, it is worth considering. So it has as much to do with the visual nature of it as it does with the song itself, though the song itself is, of course, stirring. My friend Dan Marcus has a very interesting observation, though, when he says, "When I hear the song Sunday, da, 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 daughter, I'm inclined to say there'll be sun." It really is the same situation setup as in Tomorrow from Annie.
What is your favorite song in Sunday?
Oh, Move On was the best song I heard that season. Not only because it's stirring, but because of the lyrics. And it does talk about we have to move on. And the whole point of Sunday in the Park with George is that art must move on. Yes, there is some problem when things change. Occasionally things change for the worse, but without change, things would stay the same and we'd get terribly bored. And we certainly didn't get bored with Sunday in the Park with George, which challenged us every step of the way because the music is perhaps his most complex. And then it was amazing in the second act, after you saw those people on stage in the painting once more, that suddenly they disappeared, and suddenly we were 100 years later, and my God, we're in a in an art gallery. And wait a minute, what's going on here? We were all so discombobulated by what was happening. It took us a while to get our bearings, but of course, we always had to catch up with Sondheim, didn't we?
Did this show deserve the Pulitzer, and did any of Sondheim's show deserve it more?
I don't think Eddie Snow deserved it more, but what I always felt was very, very apt is that year, Sunday in the Park was in competition with La Cage aux Folles for the Tony. And I'd say both committees got it right. La Cage aux Folles was a Tony winning show. It was certainly a musical comedy, and the Tony really has, yeah, even though it doesn't want to admit it, has much more of a commercial bent than certainly the Pulitzers. And the Pulitzer, of course, goes to a more heady work of art. Well, certainly Sunday is a more heady work of art. There are those, of course, who will always complain that Lacage shouldn't have won the Tony. You never hear anybody complain that Lacage didn't win the Pulitzer. That never happens. But I think both awards went to the right place for the right reasons.
Peter Felicia's Broadway appears in every issue of the Broadway Maven's Weekly Blast. Sign up at thebroadwaymaven.com.